Hi, this is Shira Adler, and welcome back to the Synergy Show. Now, today's show might be a little unusual in terms of its topic if you are a already follower, like, or subscriber of mine, and if not, please do so at the bottom. This is a new channel. You know that I talk a lot about things that create synergy, things that are metaphysical or musical, things that inspire, connect, really help us integrate. And actually, that's the point, because sometimes we have to go a little bit outside of our comfort zone to have a discussion about things on a very grounded, very practical level. And that does help us to create synergy. If we feel more comfortable with where we are, then we can better open ourselves to access where we're going and do so consciously. And that's why, even though it's a little atypical, so bear with me, meaning this is not a typical conversation, but it is, if you are paying attention to the news today, an essential conversation. This is about currencies. What do we currently see? Why does this matter? How does it affect us, and where are we going? So with great honor and pleasure, I'm introducing a friend of mine, Andy Schectman from Miles Franklin. Thank you so much for joining me today, Andy. I really, really appreciate it because I know how busy you are.
Good to be here, Shira. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I have a kind of a funny first question for you. If you could have one of three things, a ton of gold, 10 tons of silver, or a green jacket, which would you prefer to have?
Well, the golfer in me would love to have the green jacket for sure. But, and silver may be the most undervalued asset on the planet, maybe the best investment on the planet. But when the music stops, I do believe it'll be gold. In April of 2019, the most powerful bank on the planet, that being the Bank of International Settlements, which is otherwise known as the central banker central bank, reclassified gold as the world's only other tier one reserve asset, meaning it is as good as cash. This is probably why the central banks of the world in 2022, Shira, bought more gold than any time since 1967, the second most on record. This is probably why, when we take a look at the January numbers that just came out a few days ago, show that their month over month increase between December and January was 196% month over month increase. They are doubling down, at least they did in January.
Right.
We'll see what February and March look like when those numbers come out. But the point of it is that much like the United States Mint, which their numbers came out for March, it was the highest monthly total since 1998. On a year-to-date basis, gold coins are almost 600,000 in the first quarter. That's the most since 1999. So you're seeing, whether it be on a retail basis, whether it be on a central bank basis, whether it be on a commercial bank basis, the most sophisticated money in the world, the biggest money in the world, is de-dollarizing, and their preferred vehicle is gold. Now, I would not ignore silver. The Bank of India imported 304 million ounces. That's more than is on the entire COMEX exchange. The moral of the story is the big money is accumulating commodities. They are moving away from debt instruments like US Treasuries. They are moving away from dollars, which are being inflated and won't be quantitatively tightened, as the Fed likes to call it. They won't normalize their balance sheet. They've already shown that they've chosen inflation, and they will continue to choose inflation, where over the last 3 weeks, we've seen literally 2/3 of all the tightening that they've tried to do, which means shore up their balance sheet, sell the treasuries. All of that over the last 11 months, in the last 3 weeks, 2/3 of it has been reversed, where they've added 400 billion back to their balance sheet. So this is a situation where the biggest money in the world is using gold and silver and hard commodities as wealth in a system that's been dominated by debt instruments and being very opaque. We are transitioning to a system that is dominated by commodities and transparency. And I think that's really what we've seen over the last couple of years.
You actually just made reference to a phrase. I think it's kind of interesting. You said that they chose inflation. So what would have been the logic behind such a, quote, choice? Was it really a choice, or was it a manipulation? Like, what?
No, it's a choice. You have two choices. You either default or you inflate. By raising interest rates as high as they did, you could see, and again, I would say they haven't even begun to raise them as high as they need to go, because in order to stop inflation, you must raise rates above the rate of inflation. Now, on one hand, they lie about what inflation really is. The CPI has been changed so many times that if you just look at what it was when they measured it truthfully prior to 1980, inflation's at 15+% right now. And that's what John Williams of Shadow Stats would show us. But they tell us that's at 6 or 7%, and they raise rates to 4.5 or 5, still below the rate of inflation, which means the real return is negative. In other words, if you're getting 5% on a 10-year treasury, but inflation's at 7, you're losing 2% per year compounding. It's a real return that is negative. So they didn't raise rates high enough to do anything, but high enough to start to break the banking system. So either you raise rates to defend the currency against the erosion of inflation, or you succumb to inflation and print your way out of the problem. So in other words,
Right.
either the problem is you pay off the debt for real and raise interest rates, or you inflate. And I think that's what they've chosen. It's one or the other. It's either death by hyperinflation or death by the greatest depression of all time. And I think the road that we are trying to navigate will lead to what's called hyperstagflation, which is little or no economic growth, characterized by rising prices and rising taxes. It's the printing press meets the Great Depression, and it's not a very happy thing to think about. But the more you look at it, it becomes very obvious that we are trapped. And I don't think that they can ever normalize the balance sheet. Let me just try to break this down so you understand.
Yeah.
In 2008, when we had the great financial crisis,
Mm-hmm.
and your advisor says, you see, because you just hung on, you didn't sell, everything came back. The balance sheet of the Federal Reserve back then, and their balance sheet really is comprised of two things: mortgage-backed securities, those issued by Fannie and Freddie, and U.S. Treasuries. And the purchasing of these assets by the Fed suppresses interest rates. It drives interest rates down, which creates distortions in asset prices because cost of money is so cheap. The
Right.
balance sheet in 08 during the financial crisis, or right after, was 800 billion. It is now 9 trillion. They have added over $8 trillion worth of bonds to their balance sheet to suppress interest rates, to incentivize greater debt, to incentivize speculation, to make people feel wealthy when their home and their 401k goes way up. It's an illusion. It has been an illusion that has been fostered by suppression of interest rates. And that has created massive distortions in asset prices, that when rates rise high enough to compensate for the loss of purchasing power via inflation, it breaks the whole system and asset prices collapse. So if you raise rates high enough, you break the whole system. Another way of saying that is, what is your house worth at 3% mortgage on a 30-year mortgage, like it was a year and a half ago? What's it worth now at a 7% 30-year mortgage? What would it be worth at a 17% 30-year mortgage? All of the bonds that were sold over the last decade at 1% and 2%, this is what's breaking the banks. They're loaded with bonds at low rates. And if they're forced to sell them because they have no reserves and everyone is running for redemption, they have to
Mm-hmm.
sell the bonds that have been cut in half because they're all at 2% and you can buy them now at 4.5 or 5. So as rates rise, everything that makes people feel rich, stocks, bonds, and real estate, which have all been blown to sky high proportions due to suppression of interest rates and easy money, well, they're all inversely correlated to a rise in interest rates. And when rates rise, they all collapse. And it's a very frightening deal. So either the Fed raises rates and breaks everything, stocks, bonds, and real estate, and the banking system, or they choose inflation, what all governments have done over the tough decisions and over austerity. And they will, just like everyone else, they will try to print their way out of this problem. And that
Right.
doesn't bode well for the dollar retaining its world reserve status, which is something I've been talking an awful lot about for the last couple of years.
You have, and actually to that end, there was an interview you did, I think, with our mutual friend Mark Z. And I've been watching a little bit of that and trying to become more educated, thanks in part to the conversations that you've been having really everywhere. I mean, that's why I'm so honored that you're here, because this is a conversation people have to start paying attention to, because it affects us in the most fundamental aspects of how we live, how we feel safe, how we feel and build communities and our own families. I mean, it is that now fundamental and essential. And it is happening all over the world. So you mentioned something I'm really curious. So let's say, because we're seeing this play out with things we're hearing about BRICS, and we're seeing how the dollar is being devalued and the fiat dollar is dead and nations are now trading away from us and all of that. I think we're missing a little bit of the math. And I was curious. So this is a question that someone helped me formulate. Let's say everyone wants to do business with China. Okay. So now they're looking to do business in yuan. Basing on what I was told, someone said to me, okay, because he used to be a commodities trader, so I don't really understand this, but this is what I heard. Let's say now we're looking at 500 yuan is about $72. Okay, a gram of gold is right now about $70. They're pretty close already. So let's say $72 for 500 yuan. That seems like it might be a good peg. Do you think China is going to peg the yuan firmly and decisively to gold?
No, I don't. I think it will be part of the BRICS currencies: Brazil, Russia, China, India, South Africa, and the other 60 plus countries that want to join the Eurasian Economic Union, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the Belt Road Initiative. All of these countries, which are all aligning together, represent 85% of human population. And the BRICS currency, which we've already been told repeatedly, and again, just here the other day by the Russian deputy chairman, the Duma deputy chairman, Babakov, reiterated that the new BRICS reserve currency will be pegged to commodities. And why else make gold a tier one asset? Why else are the central banks massively accumulating it? I don't think they'll peg it to the yuan. I think it will be a greater currency. Now, already when you look at yuan and gold, they have something called the petro yuan bond that they've been using to sell oil or to purchase oil from countries like Iran, who have been sanctioned by the West. The bond is immediately convertible. It's denominated in yuan. It's used to buy the oil, but it is immediately convertible for the Iranians into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange at its face value. But I don't think they'll use the Chinese yuan and peg it to gold. It will be a new settlement currency, either issued by the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which represents 60% of human population already, or the BRICS countries more specifically. To me, there is no doubt in my mind that gold will be used to tether to a new system. And
Yeah.
I don't think it makes any sense to try and pick numbers right now, only to listen to what they're saying. Look at the countries that are accumulating all the gold. As an example, Turkey. Turkey bought more gold than anyone in the world for the last 18 months, including this year. They've formally applied to BRICS. Gold was reclassified as the world's only other tier one asset. The BRICS have told us they will peg a new system to commodities, presumably gold, maybe some others like rare earth metals, which are found primarily in the Eurasian continent. They've told us that just the other day. Again, and so when you talk about how do you show that, well, the Chinese have what's called the digital yuan, which has been operational for over 4 years, most of it operating on the Belt Road Initiative, the largest infrastructure project in human history. Over 150 countries are already on it, including all the OPEC countries. And they've been using the digital yuan to settle all of the contracts on the Belt Road, including they rolled it out at the Beijing Winter Olympics. It's done close to 30 billion in successful transactions. That will be the blockchain or the rails to show what all of these countries, I think they will use it to back the new BRICS currency. And they will show the immutability and the veracity of what every single country has pledged to the system. So I think it's coming. I think it won't be directly from China, but rather this conglomerate, this joining of countries around the world fighting against the Western hypocrisy and hegemony. And they will use distributed ledger technology to show exactly what every country is pegged. And they will have a number, whatever that number is, I don't know, but I think it will be much, much, much higher than, in dollar terms anyway, than what it is right now when the switch gets flipped. You know, you have to remember, Shira, what makes the dollar the world reserve currency? It's not the world reserve currency just because we want it to be. It's the world reserve currency because we have an agreement since 1974 with the Saudi kingdom that we will protect them. And for that, OPEC will value oil globally in dollars. Every country on the planet for 50 years has had to own dollars to buy oil. That was the agreement. Well, Saudi Arabia has already signed a joint military cooperation agreement with Russia, and just the other day joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is a military organization as well. By extension, they're being protected by China as well. So they are putting their pieces into place. They told the folks at
Right.
Davos that they're open to taking other currencies. They formally applied to BRICS. What do they need the West for when the West is saying we're going green and is destroying the value of the dollar? Why would they want to sell us their oil for an inflated dollar in a country that's going green and turning their back against them when they can join with what amounts to 85% of human population joining together in under the same rallying cry, fighting back against the Western sanctions, which was the weaponizing of the dollar, which was the massive, I think, acceleration of this trend, and a country that has bullied most of the world through sanctions and hegemony for a very long time and is going green when they can partner and align with countries that are looking for mutually beneficial, better way of life. China is going into countries like Africa or continents like Africa and all of the countries within and South America, and they are striking deals. These deals are they're peaceful modernization projects, if you will, that for sustainable development. They're going in and building bridges and roads and ports and railways and oil rigs and oil refineries, and they're allowing these countries to peacefully modernize and develop their infrastructure. And when China can come in and create harmony between and mending fences between Saudi Arabia and Iran, Sunni and Shiite Muslim, who've hated each other for centuries, to the tune where they're building embassies in each other's country right now.
Right.
The rallying cry is my enemy's enemy is my friend. The glue that makes it stick is pegging commodities like gold to a distributed ledger technology for the whole world to see. And I think that's where we're going.
Well, I happen to think you're right, which is why I wanted you to explain it to people. You mentioned Turkey. Actually, I just came back from there. Well, I was there 2 months ago. I was singing a humanitarian concert program, and it was actually for a business development meeting. I saw firsthand. I met women and people from Egypt and Syria and Turkey and Arab nations, and it was really remarkable. I mean, I was there doing my part of it, which had nothing to do with the business. It was there to bring songs of healing and hope to the land and the people. Yet I pay attention. I see who's talking and I see what's going on. And I actually am pretty excited because even though it's an excruciatingly painful time to be at this compression point in terms of humanity, in terms of what's happening in this country, it's also rather remarkable because you spoke of history. And I think people are forgetting we've only had, what, 50 years, let's see, for the gold standard to have not been the case for the United States. It goes back from what, 1492, right? It was always, let's look at Article 1, Section 10. What is true value? What is constitutional money? It's always been gold and silver, right? So only for 50 years we've been away from that. I think that we have an extraordinary opportunity. I think people like you and the services that you offer can help the people like me and those who are watching the show feeling a little nervous, looking at bank runs, looking what's happening, trying to understand what BRICS means to us, what digital currencies mean. So if you could, even as a speculator, how quickly do you think we are going back to that standard here in this country?
I don't know. I mean, I think it depends if it's reactionary or proactive. The International Monetary Fund came out with an article about a month ago that was titled "Gold as a Reserve Currency: A Barbarous Relic No More?" question mark. And you know, the IMF is kind of the Western alliance. The U.S. has veto power, and it was formulated at Bretton Woods. I think ultimately we have to go back in that direction. I can assure you that you will see a central bank digital currency in this country by 2025. The BIS said that every country had to have one by then, and we are already fast tracking this right now. So the only way that it will ever work, the only way that we will ever regain, I mean, once we lose world reserve standard, we're not getting it back. But the only way that we can ever try and stem the tide would be to do something like that proactively, beat China and the BRICS nations to the punch, issue a central bank digital currency pegged to gold. And because this all boils down to the lack of trust, and no one trusts anyone any longer. Gold is the anchor of that trust. Using distributed ledger technology, you could show it, the veracity of it, have it audited, have it transparent, have it in a way that would inspire confidence. But I think that is what this boils down to. We have outlived our good graces, courtesy of our foreign creditors. We have lived above our standard of living, what we
Right.
should be living, thanks to the outlandish and exorbitant life that we've all been able to create by being the world reserve currency. And I think those days are coming to an end. And it is upsetting the rest of the world that we can just print money. And, you know, you look at what we've done with that with inside the country here. The 2022 balance sheet just came out. The largest asset in this country is student debt. 30 some percent of all of the assets in this country, 1.7 trillion plus dollars, is student debt. That's the largest asset according to the US government. They told us that Social Security is $76 trillion underfunded. Look, you have to understand how big these numbers are. When you add the $31 trillion debt, the $76 trillion in IOUs and Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, government, military pensions, all of these unfunded liabilities on top of the $31 trillion debt exceed $150 trillion. A trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago. The numbers are too big. The game is over. The world is moving away from this system. And I think you could argue that by weaponizing the dollar and all of the boneheaded moves that our administrations have made, like destroying our energy independence and turning our back on Saudi Arabia, we are incentivizing the de-dollarization. It was the weaponizing of the dollar that sped that up. Why? I think they wanted to do this purposely and find a villain. They realize we're too far down the road to ever go back, especially as rates are rising. So instead of falling on the sword and being written about in history books for blowing up the American way of life, that being the Federal Reserve and the government with their stupid fiscal policy and the Fed with their monetary policy primarily, that they found a villain. And that villain will be Xi Jinping and Putin and OPEC and Saudi Arabia. And how could they do this to us? And the people in this country who really don't see things very clearly will believe that.
Of course they will, because people in this country are good-hearted and good-natured, perhaps, and we've already had so many, let's just say, false narratives pushed so far down our throats for so long. It is sometimes very daunting to try to use discernment, to understand history, to really keep our eyes open, keep your head on a swivel, and really notice. And that's why, again, I really needed to speak with you, because this is hard for an average American right now. We're looking around going, what are we seeing? And how is this going to affect my family and my community?
Right.
You know, where is the optimism in this? So, I mean, is there any optimism? And because I think people like you, and I know the services, if you could support or suggest anything, because we really don't know the timeline, but we see that it's like a big, you know, a little rock that's now gaining quite momentum, coming downhill, becoming a boulder straight at us. Uh, what do you think is the safest investment vehicle then for us? How do we get out of this?
To me, there isn't much of a way out of it except to first realize that something is coming at you and then move out of the way
Right.
by doing what the central banks are doing. Look, I own a precious metals company, one of the largest in the country, and people will say, well, he's talking his book. The hell I am. I'm not talking my book. If you don't realize that the world is de-dollarizing, the most sophisticated money in the world is moving away from the West. And the ramifications of that happening would be everyone dumps dollars when Saudi Arabia says we're no longer taking dollars. And every country on the planet has had to own them for 50 years. It's created a synthetic demand, and there are way more dollars outside the US than in.
Right.
And imagine a tsunami of dollars rolling across the Atlantic Ocean, hitting our shores, which would spike interest rates to the moon as to compensate for that inflation, massive inflation, hyperinflation. That a byproduct of that is everything in this country collapses: stocks, bonds, and real estate. So the dollar dumps, as does stocks, bonds, and real estate. It is the Klaus Schwab moment, the Great Reset. What do? You get out of the way of it, the way the central banks are, the way the sovereign wealth funds are, the way that the commercial banks are. You accumulate gold and silver, which has outlived 2 world wars, German hyperinflation, the Great Depression, every pandemic, and everything the world's ever thrown at it. And it is not about getting wealthy. It is wealth. And that's the only way I look at it. Now, where else could you put your money? People say real estate. No, if interest rates spike, real estate collapses.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you put this? Is a once in a 100-year change. And just like Xi Jinping whispered to Putin, that was caught on video as he was leaving, saying, this is a 100-year change and we are driving it. And they are. And when you see countries like Mexico, who just formally applied to BRICS, when you
Mm-hmm.
see countries like France, who just signed a 51-point agreement with China from 5G to military,
Right. I just saw that
and just did
article
a
as well.
huge liquid natural gas deal payable in yuan.
Mm-hmm.
When you see Brazil agree to do all of their trades with China in yuan, when you're seeing this global de-dollarization, including our allies like Turkey, like Saudi Arabia, like Mexico, like France, they're all breaking ranks. And what does that mean? It means that this is a once in 100-year type of event. This is not something that you can look at it any other way, but my God, if you don't get out of the way, you're going to get run over. And I don't like doing it like this. I mean, I've talked about owning gold
Yeah.
my whole career as wealth. That is what it has been to me forever. I never talked about getting out of the way of something that's coming. But if you don't see this, you're not paying attention. And it's really quite frightening, actually. And I think it is gaining momentum and speed. And this is something that I think is it should be a wake-up call to people. We're getting to the 12th hour already. In the past 30 days, my company, since Silicon Valley Bank failed, has added 12,000 clients in 30 days, in less than 30 days. This is 2-3 years worth of clients. The world is waking up to what is happening, and this should be a wake-up call to everyone watching this video. I've never been this concerned. We've done 9 billion in sales nearly in 30 years. I have never been this concerned ever, and have never gone out on a limb and told people, hey, this is what you need to do. If you guys go back and watch the videos that I've been doing since 2020, every single one of them, there's over 1,000, every one will talk about this trend. And it's been, weeks or months in between
Right.
trends, which are now changing by the hour. And in the last 7 days, there was over 15 developments that support this idea of de-dollarization rapidly increasing and moving away, and mutual agreements away from the dollar and away from the West that are gaining momentum. And when Saudi Arabia and OPEC say we're out, which is coming, you can see that by them joining BRICS, joining the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, telling everyone at Davos they're open to other currencies. When that happens, it's a religious experience, because every country on the planet will dump dollars, which will spike interest rates to the moon, which will collapse everything in this country like that. And I believe that our leaders could not be that stupid to not understand the ramifications of weaponizing the world reserve currency. It is not for us to say who can and can't use it. And all that did was make every other country out there say, shit, are we next? Are they going to do that to us? The European Union didn't just sanction Russian funds, they actually confiscated them and told them they're being used to build back the Ukraine. How many other countries are saying, I'm getting out of the way of this? And so they're all joining. And that's why you see Mexico, our allies, formally apply to BRICS. This is a very frightening thing that people need to wake up and realize this is a once in 100-year change that will rewrite the way history books talk about the United States, about capitalism, about everything. And I think it's time for people to understand that gold and silver are not an investment. They represent a life raft that has been used for 5,000 years. And that's why the biggest money in the world has been massively accumulating it.
That's absolutely right. And again, referencing Article 1, Section 10, it is the foundation of this country. And I think I think back to a memory I have when my late mother, when I was a little girl, for the prize during the Passover Seder or special occasion, she'd give us silver dollars. Now, I wish I still had them, because unfortunately over the years, but there was something special and beautiful about that. It actually represents more than what is real wealth. It represents the foundation and the history that a lot of us still have memories of. And I think that while it is incredibly frightening on some levels, and I am here to try to alleviate some of that fear, because education allows us to do something for ourselves and our families and our communities that we do not feel so disempowered, because that's what's happening. Everyone's saying, I don't understand this. I saw a bank run. I saw a bank close. What does this mean? What's happening? There are still baby steps we can do to, as you say, step out of the way and choose a different alignment, make a different preference, make a different choice, and manifest accordingly. I speak in metaphysical terms, but we're saying the same thing. Go back, find those silver dollars. I hate to say this out loud on the show, but call you, get in touch, get those accounts going. How does one do that? I know you've already had 12,000 new clients in a month. I'm going to add a few more
They
to
would send us an email. Our new website is almost done, which will allow people to buy online. In the meantime, go to info@milesfranklin and request.com and request a current price list, request answers to questions or to be contacted. And our prices will be amongst the very best. Our expertise is decades long. All of our brokers have cumulative, I don't know, tons and tons of experience. They're not order takers. Literally, they will be able to discuss geopolitical events, economic events, the ramifications of what is happening. And we'd love to work with your listeners. There's no obligation. We do not ship outside of the United States other than to Canada at this time. But anyone within North America should feel um, um, more than welcomed to reach out to us at info@milesfranklin, request a price sheet, ask questions, and we'd be thrilled to work with your listeners, no matter how busy we are.
I appreciate that. You have always been, since the first time I was introduced to you, you are what my mother and grandmother would call a real mensch. You are. You are
Thank
here
you.
to
I know
serve
what that
people.
means, and that's something that everyone should try to become. Subscribe to be a mention. The world would be a better place. So I appreciate that very, very much. Shira, I really do. And look, I hope I'm wrong. Unfortunately, I don't think I am. And I think
I don't
it's
think you are
accelerating.
either, and we're okay with that. I think that the writing has long been on the wall. It's okay to be correct as long as you're one of the people that's trying to offer education, wisdom, and a grounded response. As long as we have something we can do, we do not give our power away completely. There are decisions that have been made on behalf of us that have controlled us. We're actually stepping away from that. So the only good part of, quote, destruction and the annihilation of everything that we think we knew and were built upon is that we get back into the basics of who are we really as individuals, as Americans. That's where I see the hope. Get educated. Everybody watching this, please do contact my friend Andy Schectman here from Miles Franklin. Again, thank you, Andy, so much for your time today. And
Pleasure is mine. You stay well.
thank you.